Welcome, friends. We're so glad to have you here. We've prepared some incredible stories that we hope you'll enjoy. If you do, and you'd like to support the channel and help it grow, please consider subscribing. Your support means the world to us. It was the summer of 1987, and I was 22, hitchhiking across California. It wasn't unusual back then. Plenty of people hitched rides, and I'd already done it a dozen times without issue. I was low on cash and itching for adventure, so when I decided to visit my friend Julie in Los Angeles, thumbing a ride down the Pacific Coast Highway seemed like the perfect solution. I had a backpack with some clothes, a paperback novel, and a Walkman to keep me company. I started early that morning near Santa Cruz, figuring I'd get to LA by nightfall if I caught a few good rides. The first car that stopped was an old VW bus driven by a group of surfers heading to Big Sur. They were laid back, laughing and blasting Van Halen, and I felt safe with them. After they dropped me off near Monterey, I stood by the side of the highway with my thumb out, the sun beating down on my shoulders. It took nearly an hour before the next car stopped, a beat-up brown sedan with peeling paint and a dented fender. The driver was a man in his mid-40s, with thinning hair and thick glasses. He looked ordinary enough, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. "Heading south?" he asked, leaning over to push open the passenger door. "Yeah, I'm going to LA," I said. "I can take you as far as Santa Barbara," he replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I hesitated for a moment. Something about him made me feel uneasy. But the sun was brutal, and I didn't want to waste more hours waiting. "Thanks," I said, climbing in. The car smelled faintly of sweat and stale coffee. I noticed fast food wrappers crumpled on the floor and an ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts. As we pulled onto the highway, he started making small talk, asking where I was from, what I was doing in California, and if I traveled alone often. I answered his questions politely, keeping my responses vague. I told him I was meeting friends in LA, hoping it would discourage him from getting any ideas. But as we drove, his questions became more personal. "You got a boyfriend?" he asked, glancing at me out of the corner of his eye. I lied and said yes. "He's meeting me in LA, I added for good measure. The man didn't respond right away. He just smiled, a strange tight-lipped smile, and kept his eyes on the road. About an hour into the drive, we passed a gas station, and he pulled off without asking. "Need to stretch my legs," he said. While he went inside, I debated getting out and finding another ride. Something about him felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He hadn't done anything overtly threatening. Maybe I was just being paranoid. When he returned, he handed me a soda and a candy bar. "Figured you might be hungry," he said. "Thanks," I said, though I didn't open either. As we got back on the road, the atmosphere in the car shifted. The man started talking less, his eyes flicking toward me in the rearview mirror every so often. I tried to focus on the scenery outside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. About 20 miles outside of Santa Barbara, he turned off the highway onto a narrow, winding road that led into the hills. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Shortcut," he said curtly. I didn't believe him. The road was deserted, surrounded by nothing but dry scrub and the occasional cluster of trees. My heart started to race as I gripped the door handle. "You can just drop me off here," I said, forcing a casual tone. He ignored me, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Seriously, I can walk the rest of the way," I said louder this time. Still no response. The car slowed as he pulled onto a dirt path that led into a secluded clearing. My pulse was pounding in my ears. "This is far enough," I said, panic creeping into my voice. The man stopped the car but didn't turn off the engine. He turned to face me, his expression blank, but his eyes sharp and calculating. "Get out," he said. "What? Out," he repeated. "Now." I hesitated, my mind racing. Was he going to leave me here? Or was this the part where things turned violent? I opened the door slowly, keeping my eyes on him. As soon as my feet hit the ground, I slung my backpack over my shoulder and started walking, hoping he'd drive off. But he didn't. Instead, he got out too. I froze as he came around the car, standing between me and the dirt path leading back to the highway. "You shouldn't hitchhike, you know," he said, his voice calm but cold. "You never know who you're getting in the car with." I didn't respond. My hands were shaking as I tightened my grip on my backpack strap. "What's in the bag?" he asked, stepping closer. "Just clothes," I said quickly. He laughed, a low, hollow sound. "You're lying." I took a step back, glancing over my shoulder. There was nothing but scrub and hills for miles. No houses, no cars, no people. He took another step toward me, and that's when I bolted. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning as I scrambled up the rocky hill toward the highway. I could hear him shouting behind me, his footsteps crunching on the gravel, but adrenaline pushed me forward. When I finally reached the road, I waved frantically at an approaching car. The driver, a middle-aged woman, slammed on the brakes and rolled down her window. "Help me," I gasped, pointing behind me. The woman didn't ask questions. She unlocked the door, and I jumped in just as the man emerged from the path. He stopped when he saw the car, his face contorted with anger. "Is that him?" the woman asked, locking the doors. I nodded, too shaken to speak. She drove me straight to the nearest police station, where I filed a report. But without a license plate or a clear description, there wasn't much they could do. To this day, I don't know what that man's intentions were, and I don't want to. But I've never hitchhiked again. In the summer of 1984, I was 19 years old, fresh out of my first year of college, and desperate for a break. My best friend Lisa had invited me to spend 2 weeks at her family's lake cabin in northern Michigan. It sounded like paradise, lazy days swimming, late nights laughing around a bonfire, and no worries except for sunburns and mosquito bites. But even as I packed my bag, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It had been 2 months since I'd broken up with Derek, my high school boyfriend turned possessive nightmare. At first, he seemed perfect, charming, good-looking, and always the life of the party. But by the time I'd gone away to college, his charm had turned into something darker. Derek hated that I was in college, hated that I had new friends and a life that didn't revolve around him. He'd show up unannounced at my dorm, sulk if I didn't call him every night, and accuse me of cheating if I so much as mentioned another guy. When I finally broke up with him, he begged, pleaded, and cried, swearing he'd change. When that didn't work, he got angry. "You'll regret this, he said the last time I saw him." His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold, like he was already planning something. I thought going to the lake with Lisa would be the perfect way to forget about him, to finally relax. And for the first few days, it was. Lisa's family cabin was small but cozy, tucked into the woods right by the water. We spent our days swimming and sunbathing, and our nights roasting marshmallows and talking about everything and nothing. On the 4th day, we decided to take the canoe out to a secluded spot on the lake. It was a perfect summer day. The sun was shining, the water was calm, and we had the whole place to ourselves. We were lying on the grass by the shore, laughing about some stupid joke Lisa had made, when I noticed something across the water. A man was standing on the opposite shore, half hidden by the trees. He was too far away for me to make out his face, but something about the way he was standing, still, almost unnaturally still, sent a shiver down my spine. "Do you see that guy?" I asked Lisa, sitting up. She glanced across the lake and shrugged. "Probably just someone hiking or fishing. There's a trail over there." I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching us. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The cabin was small, just 2 bedrooms and a tiny living room. Lisa and I were sharing the pull-out couch, and the windows were open to let in the cool summer air. I lay there, listening to the sounds of the lake, the gentle lapping of water, the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then I heard it, a faint crunch of footsteps on gravel, just outside the cabin. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Lisa, nudging her awake. "Hear what?" she mumbled, half asleep. "Footsteps. Outside." Lisa sat up and listened for a moment, but the sound was gone. "Probably just an animal," she said, lying back down. But I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Lisa's parents were coming up to the cabin for the weekend, and their arrival brought a sense of safety. We spent the day swimming and grilling burgers, and by the time night fell, I'd almost forgotten about the man on the shore and the footsteps. Almost. Around midnight, Lisa and I decided to walk down to the dock. The moon was bright, casting a silvery glow over the lake. We sat there with our feet in the water, talking about our plans for the fall semester. Then I heard it again, the crunch of footsteps. This time, it was closer. "Lisa," I whispered, gripping her arm. She heard it too. We both turned toward the woods, but the shadows were too thick to see anything. "Who's there?" Lisa called out, trying to sound brave. Silence. And then, a voice I recognized all too well. "Anna, it's me." My blood turned to ice. Derek stepped out of the shadows, his face partially lit by the moonlight. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "I needed to talk to you," he said, as if showing up uninvited in the middle of nowhere was perfectly normal. "How did you even find me?" He didn't answer, just took a step closer. Lisa stood up, putting herself between us. "You need to leave," she said firmly. Derek ignored her, his eyes locked on mine. "I'm not going anywhere until we talk." I grabbed Lisa's arm. "Let's go back to the cabin," I whispered. We walked quickly up the path, but Derek followed, his footsteps heavy behind us. "You owe me this, Anna," he called out. "After everything I've done for you, you owe me." Lisa's dad met us at the door, holding a baseball bat. Derek stopped in his tracks, his hands up. "I just want to talk to her," he said, his voice dripping with false innocence. "You need to leave," Lisa's dad said, his voice low and dangerous. Derek stared at me for a long moment before finally turning and walking back into the woods. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the look in his eyes, the way he'd said my name. The next day, Lisa's dad drove me to the sheriff's office in town to file a report. Thought that would be the end of it, but Derek wasn't done. That night, we found a note taped to the cabin door. "You can't hide from me forever." Lisa's parents insisted we pack up and leave the next morning. On the drive home, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting Derek to be following us. It's been decades since that summer, but I still have nightmares about Derek. Every time I hear footsteps behind me, every time I see a shadow in the woods, I'm taken back to that cabin by the lake. Some people think the scariest stories are about ghosts or monsters, but I know better. The scariest thing in the world is someone who won't let go. It was 1986, and I was 23 when I met Eddie. We both worked at the same diner, him as a cook and me as a waitress. Eddie had that classic bad boy look, greased back hair, leather jacket, and a sly grin that always made the older waitresses giggle. But what drew me in wasn't his appearance. It was how he could be soft when he wanted to. When my car broke down in the parking lot one night, Eddie stayed late after his shift to fix it. "Can't have you walking home alone, doll," he said. I was smitten. At first, dating Eddie was exciting. He was spontaneous, always taking me on late-night drives to the outskirts of town where we'd park under the stars and talk about our dreams. He told me he wanted to open his own restaurant someday, and I believed him. He had this passion that made you want to believe in him. But as the months went on, the excitement started to fade. Eddie's temper showed itself in small, ugly ways. He didn't like when I talked to the male customers at the diner, even though it was part of my job. "Why were you laughing at that guy's joke?" he'd ask, his jaw tight. I'd explain that it was nothing, but he'd just nod, his eyes hard and unreadable. One night, we were supposed to go to a movie, but I told him I couldn't because I was covering a coworker's shift. He showed up at the diner anyway, sitting in one of the back booths, silently watching me the entire night. When I asked why he came, he said, "I just like knowing where you are." That should have been my first clue to leave, but it wasn't. Things escalated slowly. Eddie started to show up uninvited, waiting for me outside my apartment or my shifts. If I went out with my girlfriends, he'd call my landline over and over until I got home. At the time, I chalked it up to him being protective. He just loves me too much, I told myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't normal. The breaking point came on a Saturday night. I had just gotten off work and was locking up the diner when Eddie appeared out of nowhere. He looked furious. "Who gave you a ride home last night?" he demanded. I froze. The night before, my coworker Rick had given me a lift because my car was acting up again. "Rick," I said cautiously. "Why?" Eddie's face twisted in anger. "I saw you, Anna," he hissed. "I saw you getting out of his car like you were his girl." I tried to explain, but he wasn't listening. He grabbed my arm hard and pulled me toward his car. "Get in," he barked. I refused. "Eddie, you're scaring me," I said, my voice shaking. His grip tightened. "You don't get to scare me like that, Anna. You don't get to make me look like a fool." Passing car's headlights startled him, and he let go. I ran inside and locked the door, shaking as I called my best friend to come pick me up. The next day, I broke up with him. He didn't take it well. Eddie started showing up at my apartment late at night, banging on the door and shouting for me to let him in. My neighbors complained, but nothing came of it. He left notes under my door, some apologizing and begging me to take him back, others accusing me of ruining his life. One time, I came home to find my bedroom window open, even though I was sure I'd locked it. Nothing was missing, but a feeling of dread settled over me. Then, the phone calls started. This was before caller ID, so I couldn't prove it was Eddie, but I knew it was him. The calls would come at all hours of the night. Sometimes he'd just breathe into the receiver, and other times he'd whisper, "You'll regret this." The scariest incident happened about 3 months after the breakup. I was staying late at the diner to close up when the power suddenly went out. I figured it was just a blown fuse, so I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the back room to check. As I walked through the darkened diner, I heard a noise, a faint creak, like someone stepping on the floorboards. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I tried to convince myself it was just the building settling, but then I heard it again, louder this time. I turned toward the sound and saw a shadow move near the booths. My heart pounded as I slowly backed toward the door, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. "Anna," a voice said, low and chilling. It was Eddie. He stepped out from the shadows, his face partially obscured by the dim beam of my flashlight. "You shouldn't have left me," he said, his voice eerily calm. "We were good together. We could still be good together." My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. "Eddie, you need to leave," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He took a step closer. "You think you can just throw me away? Like I don't matter?" I bolted for the door, adrenaline taking over. I barely made it out before he lunged, slamming the door behind me and locking it from the outside. I ran to the payphone on the corner and called the police. When they arrived, Eddie was gone. I filed a restraining order the next day. Eddie left town shortly after, but I never felt safe again. I moved apartments, changed my schedule, and started carrying mace in my purse. It's been almost 40 years since then, but I still check the locks on my doors 3 times before bed. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I swear I can hear his voice in my head, whispering, "You'll regret this."